Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am James Just, your host. With me today is Jason McPhee. I almost called you a different name there, Jason. You got Jason McPhee from the Knuckleheads of Liberty. He's my guest. And with us from Southern California, or is it Central California, Richard? Mr. Richard Fields. Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, from the heart of libertarianism, Orange County.
Orange County, the closest thing to libertarian we get in California is that, or maybe that's Alpine County, but there's like 300 people who live in Alpine County. So, talking today, the Colorado School District has kind of stood up to its teachers' unions because they had what is classified in the newspaper as a stunning rejection of capitalism. And this is something we're going to have a kind of a theme through the show tonight, is how certain groups of people want to claim that their views aren't political, even though they clearly are, right? So we have teachers who are really supposed to just educate children on kind of the basics, right? Math, arithmetic, and reading, and not impose their politics on people. But when teachers are rejecting capitalism and teaching that to their students, you know, there's a problem. Because most of us, whether we think of capitalism correctly or not, are, if not pro-capitalist, at least pro-markets, right? We're not a Marxist country. And is that the direction? You know, which one of you guys? Richard, do you want to?
Well, the problem, of course, is whenever you let a political institution, which of course government is, control education. They eventually, and probably very quickly, are going to teach whatever the dominant political ideology is. And right now, at least within the people who control the education establishment, and by that I mean the teachers' unions and the education establishment, you're going to have a lot of leftists in control, and they're teaching leftist ideology. They won't call it ideology; they'll just call it, whatever they want to call it, education. But in fact, it's leftist ideology, and there's no solution to it. As long as the unions and the education bureaucrats are in control, they're going to teach whatever they feel like teaching, which is going to probably be more left of center than right of center. The only solution to this, of course, is getting away from public schools and getting away from, I should say, government schools and moving toward private education. Private schools, homeschooling, those are the antidotes to getting government propaganda in school, because that's all we're getting: government propaganda, and not just government propaganda, but left-wing government propaganda. You're not going to hear if the Republicans are in control, you're not going to all of a sudden start hearing, Fox News viewpoints or something like that. You're still going to hear the leftist side, although perhaps not quite as drastically, simply because it's the left who have infiltrated and taken control of the education establishment. That's not going to change.
Yeah,
or at least not anytime soon.
I know, Jason, you've been a champion of school choice, right? Essentially on your show and here, you talk about how important school choice is. And so what do you think about this?
Well, I think one of the things that's absolutely astounding is in the statement they put out. One of the parts of the statement that they said is that capitalism is in opposition to fully addressing systemic racism, education inequality, and income inequality, among other things they had in their list. But, I thought about a few of these things. Education inequality. These guys have been in control of education for, 50, 60 years? If it's unequal, it's because it's the way they're running it, right? I mean, it screams we need some competition here, and yet they want to keep this top-down control that is just insane. But other issues too, systemic racism. Capitalism is all about allowing for people to experiment and with whatever the majority is, against whatever the majority is for. I mean, you look at the Jackie Robinson story in baseball, and I mean, that's a perfect example of capitalism when most of the country had laws that forbid black people from playing baseball with in the major leagues, capitalism allowed Jackie Robinson the opportunity to come in because there were some areas that weren't covered by those jurisdictions that were forbidding black people to come in. That was the laws in those places. That wasn't capitalism that was stopping black people from coming in. And it was capitalism that allowed Jackie Robinson to come in and do so well. So, some of these statements they make, it's just stunning the ignorance these people have about markets who are teaching our kids.
Well, and I'm going to rail on this again. Part of the thing we do is we compare capitalism to socialism, Marxism, whatever other, but they're not actually the same thing. Capitalism isn't a plan. It's an explanation of what happens when people interact with each other economically. It's an explanation. Socialism is actually someone trying to decide what the future is. Capitalism has no plan for the future. The plan is whatever y'all feel like happening, the kind of the amalgamation, so to say, of activity, of economic activity. It's not a plan. There's no one sitting there planning out capitalism. It's just us interacting with each other, and its end result is its end result.
But that's what makes it so good. It's the idea that no one's planning it out. The idea that we are just voluntarily interacting with each other, and whatever comes out, comes out. And usually that's better than when some central guy tries to plan it for everybody.
Yeah, and when central planners get involved, things can tend to go haywire, right? I'm going to skip down here to the bottom. Our culture wars are spreading to work because it's kind of related. Republicans and Democrat workers are divided over this diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm always going, what does that actually specifically mean, diversity, equity, inclusion? Because it's one of those things that superficially it sounds great, but the devil's in the details, right? What exactly does it mean, and what are you willing to do to get to this theoretical goal that you've created, but haven't actually created? Because there's no specifics. We need to get to this diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sounds great, but Richard, what does it actually mean?
It means whatever the person saying it means, which is whatever's in their interest. I think that the bottom line here is there's no saying, those who can do, those who can't teach. And people who are successful in the real world, providing goods and services that other people want to buy, they don't pay a whole lot of attention to the liberal arts, to put it very broadly. They spend a lot of time paying attention to marketing, to inventing things, to figuring out how to serve customers better, figuring out how to get more customers, figuring out how ultimately to provide things that people actually willingly want to buy. Now that results in people providing things that certain other people don't think should be a part of the marketplace. Anything that's related to vice, drinking or cigarettes or sexual businesses, those are frowned upon by certain moral scolds. And so they say, the market is not providing what we think it should provide, or it's providing things that we think should never, ever be available. Therefore, we're going to control the market to stop those things. Now, that's the role of more the right in controlling markets. But the left does the same thing. We don't think that anybody should have the right of free association, the right to associate with whoever they want to. We think everybody should be required to associate with everybody else, and that's kind of what diversity and equity and so forth.
Yeah, and we are
and inclusion is all about.
Yeah, and we're not opposed to the ideal of that people should be your organizations and your communities should be naturally diverse, organically diverse, right? Because diversity is actually a strength, but diversity of thought and perspective is a strength. If your diversity is only superficial, then it's not actually a strength. It's just a weakness, right? You're a paper tiger, apparently. Am I kind of wrong?
Well, yeah, and as far as opinion is concerned, what they're looking for is a singularity of opinion, not diversity of opinion. They're looking for everyone to have exactly the same opinion that they do.
Yeah, and that's
what happens when anybody who has a control mindset gets into a position of control, particularly in a field like education.
Yeah. it's pretty much you can believe anything you want to believe as long as you agree with me.
Yeah. Yeah, right, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's you must agree with me, and then and if you look diverse, if you're superficially diverse, that's good enough. But
Yeah.
superficial diversity will have a long-term impact, will it not? I mean,
The crazy thing, it's not really even superficial diversity. I mean, they are looking for a certain outcome. That's what it really boils down to. I mean, if you really were looking for superficial diversity, you would go into the NFL and the NBA and you would start chopping these teams apart and bringing in a whole bunch of people who aren't currently represented in that group. But we're not really looking for that superficial diversity everywhere. That's the point, right? Is that, and so a lot of the people behind this DEI are really looking for a certain outcome. It has nothing to do with, absolutely reflecting society. And even then, that's not a great thing if you're just going to judge people. I think the Biden administration has been a perfect example of the horrors of appointing people just because of identity groups. I mean, we've had, they have this one person who works in the nuclear regulatory who just got arrested for stealing people's luggage out of, and the whole point of why that guy was put there was specifically because of his identity group. He identified as some kind of, I think it was some kind of transsexual gender group. I'm not sure what it was, but it was some kind of group that's why they put him there. And they celebrated that. And they said that this is, why you're here. And it's the same thing with so many other things. They announced how, well, we have the most women ever in our, deciding what our financial institutions are going to do, and all these other kind of leadership things where they said, that this is what they have. And it's all falling apart precisely because they didn't put these people in for what they thought. They put them in for these superficial identities.
and that is the danger, right? It's one thing if you have competent people who happen to be a woman or who happen to be some member of whatever community they want, and you say, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to go look in places that we normally don't look to try to find qualified people. Great. I have no problem with that. That's actually perfect. You should be doing that. But when you go, I'm going to go hire an unqualified person and hope that they can survive, hope that they can thrive in this position that they're not qualified for. That's not helpful to anybody. It's not helpful to an organization. It's not helpful to that person.
Yeah. It's not helpful to their cause in the end either, because if people from those groups are underperforming because they didn't get the right people from those groups by figuring out what they thought just by what they look like, then it's going to poison everybody in the future toward thinking this stuff is a bad goal anyways.
Yeah, and we see how this kind of mindset, this the mindset of moral authority, right? It's kind of a phony moral authority. But we saw a few years ago, this notion of punch a Nazi, right? If you want to punch a Nazi, you're morally justified, and it's fine. Even if they're just kind of walking down the street, not doing anything to anybody, that's perfectly fine. And as I said at the time, I said what you're actually doing is you're saying that violence is acceptable if you deem it morally acceptable. And that will have a consequence because the slippery slope exists. And now, this last week, we've had, in Minneapolis, there was a city council nomination, and it descended into a brawl. Because you got these two activist groups got upset at each other, and they had a physical fight. Now, these aren't Republicans and Democrats fighting. These are Democrats and Democrats fighting over who gets to run for mayor. And their supporters ended up in a brawl over this. And it's not a surprise to me that when you have people who have decided that you can morally oppress somebody, it's moral to oppress somebody. It's moral to act violently against somebody because you don't like how they act. Well, then where's the line going to stop? Yeah, Nazis, okay, fine, but who's a Nazi? How are you going to define Nazi, right? And next thing you know, your next door neighbor's a Nazi because he doesn't like, the same kind of donuts you do. That's kind of where we've come. Or am I way off base on this kind of thing, Jason?
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's a moral precept that I was drilled into me when I was a kid. The ends don't justify the means. And when in the situation in Minneapolis, or whenever you have people using government to force other people to do what they think should be done, that's saying that the ends justify the means. They're saying that that violence or the threat of violence or the threat of imprisonment is perfectly fine to make sure that what we think should happen happens, or what we think should not happen does not. The ends, once you accept the idea that the ends justify the means, you've accepted every ugly fascist or communist or totalitarian philosophy that you can possibly think of, because that's their guiding principle. All tyrannies say the ends justify the means. All republics or uh, legitimate democracies say otherwise. They say no, the end does not justify the means. If you want to get what you want, you have to persuade people to do that or not do that. You can't force them. Uh, when you introduce the idea of force, then you're introducing the idea of a war of all against all, and that's the left eating their own. Democrats fighting among Democrats in Minneapolis is just a good example of that. The, the when the Soviet Union was formed, you had Trotskyites and Leninists and other splinter groups of communists fighting among each other until one group got enough power to basically eradicate or kill all of their opponents. When the ends justify the means, the ultimate result is a totalitarian state.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's certainly true, and I think it's I think it's amplified too by how much how we've let government grow, because when you mentioned communism, Richard, it was everything. So I mean, everything was at stake. If you didn't get your way, it was all going the other guy's way. Well, as we've allowed government to grow significantly in this country, I think that's what's happening, is that everybody is seeing that, hey, look, each election, I only get one shot at this every year or two to try and get my perspectives through, and if I lose, then it's a whole market basket of things. It's not just one thing. You don't just lose on one item. You lose, as we've seen with Joe Biden, it's on a whole host of things, whether or not you're going to be forced to take a vaccine, whether or not you're going to be forced to attend DEI training at work, whether or not you're going to be forced to lock down your business. Just all these kinds of things are it's one sweeping hand that's going to happen, and the more government is pushed into it. I mean, just think about religion. I mean, people who have followed their churches, they literally weren't able to even attend church during some of this period of time, and even though that if you were on the other side of the political equation, you were allowed to go out and essentially attend peaceful protests, which kind of looked like riots in some places. But I mean, that was allowed. Whereas if you were just wanted to attend church, you were being arrested. It just absolutely nuts. And so the bigger you make government, the more it gets into your life, the more of a it's an all or nothing venture. So people are going to get more and more violent, I think, to protect their rights.
Well, and as government becomes more and more omnipresent, right? As it enters more of our lives, and we have more and more activists running the political machines, right? Because we no longer have politicians running the machines; it's activists. This is a problem that's going to grow. I think you're right, because our politicians no longer have a representative mindset. They're there to represent their narrow worldview, instead of trying to say, okay, now I've been elected, I have to figure out how to represent this whole body politic. And instead, it's I have to represent the activists who voted me into office and who donate to my campaign. And so that's, I don't know, for me, that's kind of where the problem is that everything has been politicized. So of course, everything is politicized.
But even that seems to be mission impossible, right? Because you say you're supposed to represent everybody, but the problem is that when a planner tries to represent everybody, he can't possibly know what it is that everybody values, and so that's the problem, right? Is that he can kind of take a poll, and whatever the limitations are, the poll, he can figure out maybe, okay, in some ham-handed way, I kind of know that the public likes this or that, but there's no way he can know really what everybody likes. So you're going to get these really coarse solutions to everything.
The point is you're supposed to try. It's an impossible task, right? Like you said, it's literally an impossible task. You can't make everybody happy, but you can try, and then people will feel heard, and people feeling heard kind of helps. But if politics are impacting every spot of your life, then we are going to get this toxic culture that we're involved into now. And speaking of toxic cultures, one of the most sacred premises in American law, this article is claiming, is bunk. Is it better that 10 guilty persons go free then one innocent person is convicted, because there's a poll recently that shows that Americans no longer really believe that kind of universally. We used to always believe that it's better for a guilty person to go free than an innocent man to suffer, but that is no longer necessarily the case. And it is, what do you think about that, Jason?
Well, the way I see it, I mean, as a libertarian type, a liberty-minded person, you just can't allow the government to get into the point where you're saying, hey, look, it's okay to break a few eggs, to make an omelet or whatever, having the government condemn people who are innocent is about as bad as it gets. But I think the problem is that we've had a system that's become so perverted over the last few years that we have watched people who are guilty literally be let out of prison to go on and commit more crimes. And I think people are just getting fed up with how bad the government is doing its job of just normal policing, that they're getting fed up, and you're seeing a backlash now start to happen, which is scary, because we don't want to see innocent people thrown in jail or convicted of crimes that they shouldn't be.
Yeah, Richard, I saw a documentary on El Salvador, where they cleared up their gangs by essentially removing human rights, and essentially anybody with a gang tattoo, anybody who the police thought would be a gang, are now imprisoned. They've imprisoned like 65,000 alleged gang members, and now El Salvador is now one of the most peaceful countries in Latin America, but at what cost? And and for those of us sitting here in the United States, and what do we have to learn from that? Richard, I don't know. I'm conflicted when it comes to this kind of a thing.
Well, I think what you have to look at is this, from my perspective, is that we're all guilty of something. Somebody, a Harvard professor, wrote a book, everybody commits 3 felonies a day. And there's a lot of truth in that. The federal criminal code, is not to mention state and local criminal codes, are so long, convoluted, and detailed and incomprehensible that it's impossible to always be in full compliance with the law all the time. I think it was Dostoevsky. No, it was whoever was the head of the Soviet police back in the time of Lenin or Stalin, who said, "You show me the man, I'll show you the crime." And if we get rid of the Blackstone principle that you have to prove, that it's better to have the innocent go free, or the guilty go free, than the innocent be punished. Once that goes, then you really come back to what we talked about earlier, the whole idea of everybody being in agreement. If you agree with me and are a yes man and just toe the line 100%, then whatever you do, I will ignore any possible
indiscretion,
instances of disobeying the law, as long as you're loyal, as long as you're a good foot soldier in whatever it is my cause is. I'm talking about my being the totalitarian ruler. As long as you toe the line and do everything that the ruler wants, you're fine. As soon as you don't, we'll find something to hang you on, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're innocent or guilty. To hell with Blackstone. You're going into you're done, and we see that more and more in modern politics. I think we've got on the agenda at some point talking about the whole national political scene, where people are basically, we've got to accuse. You're accused of something, you're guilty until you can prove that you're innocent. And by that time, you're out of office.
Yeah. It's last week. You'll hear that last week. Yes, that discussion last week. We got one more topic that I want to cover. Actually, it's 2, but we're going to roll them into one. Gavin Newsom has admitted that the California tax system specifically, is unsustainable. And secondly, why is everyone fleeing California? I think these two are kind of related. If you ask me, a California tax system that is now, we're underwater, $30 billion or whatever it is now underwater. And more Californians, especially rich ones, are leaving. They're running out of people to tax. Richard, what are we going to do? What's California going to do?
Yeah. I mean, what you've got is you have a situation where, money finds where it's well liked, and people who are capable of earning lots of money are going to go wherever more of that money remains their own. And when you've got Silicon Valley, which is really a knowledge industry, which is really people that work in software and development and so forth can work from anywhere. And now they're figuring out, well, since I can, I will. Why should I pay 13% in California when I can pay 0% in a very, very nice cultural setting like Austin, Texas, or any number of other places, or even Puerto Rico or other foreign countries where I don't have to pay anything. That's what people are saying. They're saying, "The heck with you and your high taxes. I'm out of here." Yeah, the climate's nice. Yeah, the scenery is nice, but at what price?
Yeah, at some point, right, Jason, at some point it becomes, well, yeah, you can make more money in California, but it costs way much more, and so you're better off somewhere else. Right? Even if you're making a little bit less more money, you're spending less money, and so your standard of living is actually higher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Laffer figured it out a long time ago. With the Laffer curve, if where is the point? And this is not a libertarian concept, but it's a practical concept. Where do you raise the most tax revenue? At 100%, nobody works. At 0%, nobody pays anything. So somewhere on that continuum, there's a tax rate that will allow the maximization of tax revenue. California is way up on, way too close to the 100%, where nobody works or nobody stays, which is the same thing.
Yeah. Well, a big part of the problem too, and we're kind of dodging around that, is it's not just the taxing part, it's the spending part is just absolutely insane. I mean, they've gone up in the last 10 or 20 years, I can't quite remember how long, but from about $100 million budget to about a $300 million, or not billion, excuse me. Yeah, $1 billion budget. And, so that shortfall of $30 billion, that's like 10% right now of the current budget. But look at what we're getting for the money. I mean, it's if you live in San Francisco, which is where, near where a lot of these wealthy people live, you're getting places that are starting to become unlivable. So it's not just that you're being taxed at such high rates. It's also that the government is spending ridiculous amounts of money on things that aren't doing a very good job, that they're making the place worse than better.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if you were getting some good roads and competent transit and the homeless were taken care of properly and all these issues were actually being solved, but they're not. They're actually getting worse. We're spending more money for worse results. And so the people who are results driven, the rich, they're out of here. And why wouldn't you? Right? Why wouldn't you leave? If you could, why wouldn't you?
Well, the funny thing is, as they're taking this money and they're redirecting it, and then they're gaslighting you that the problem is capitalism at the same time. They're sort of bringing it back to where we started, that somehow capitalism's the problem and it's not these big spending central planners, essentially. So,
yeah. So, one more thing we've got on our schedule. We've got a minute. Chicago mayors has pledged commitment to the progressive strategy, Ask for Unity, which I don't even know what to do with Chicago at this point. They voted out Lightfoot and voted in someone who's exactly the same. What are they going to do? I don't know. We are out of time, my friends.
Makes you fond for remembering Boss Daly.
Thank you, Richard. We are out of here. Thank you for watching us. Thank you, Jason. And good night. And please remember to love everybody.